views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hello, everyone. I'm Daren Jaime. Welcome to the Social Justice Forum. In case you're asking the question, what are the social justice forums about? Well, we look at the inequities that so many people are facing around the country. We talk about civic dialogue, we promote awareness, and we invite you to be connected to us. We also do a great job of presenting multiple points of view. And so we want you to stay with us because the Social Justice Forums begins right now. And welcome back. Just Leadership USA is a not-for-profit and a national not-for-profit that's dedicated to decarcerating the United States by educating, elevating, and empowering the people and communities most impacted by systemic racism to drive, amplify, and to sustain the kinds of policy reform building that thrives for sustainable and healthy communities. And joining us now and sharing a little bit more, we are pleased to be joined by the President and CEO of Just Leadership USA, DeAnna Hoskins. And DeAnna, glad to have you.
Thank you, Daren. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, when we talk about decarcerating, obviously that's a huge issue across America, more particularly New York City. Let me go a little bit closer to the borough of the Bronx. And right there in the Bronx, right in New York City's area, we've got the whole issue of Rikers Island. Just share with us a little bit right now about your work, and then we'll talk a little bit about Rikers Island.
Thank you, Daren. So I took over Just Leadership in 2018. In 2016, the founder launched the Close Rikers campaign. And he launched a campaign based on personal experience of closed Rikers, but also the atrocities that were happening at Rikers, right? They commissioned a report called the Littman Report when Judge Littman pulled a commission together. The federal government had also did a report of just the atrocities that were happening, the violence that was embedded into the culture of the facility and moving forward. So we continued on with that campaign, empowering those who had been impacted by Rikers Island, individuals, their family members who had experienced the various deaths, the various violence, and actually lack of care on Rikers Island. So now we're here in 2021. The vote to close Rikers went through City Council in 2019. We received the vote, the council voted that Rikers should close by 2026. What we're starting to see now, what is happening is while we don't want to see anyone die, it is the reason, it is further entrenching the reason that this facility must close, that the operations of this facility and just the way the facility was even built is unsafe for individuals to be there. But also the decarceration. At one time, New York City incarcerated over 22,000 people on Rikers Island. Right now, we're holding at about 5,000 or a little more. Once the pandemic hit, we were right up under 4,000. So there is an uptick in the number being incarcerated, but definitely a decarceration strategy. The goal of the barrel-based facilities was three-pronged. One, individuals should be closer to their family members. Trying to get to Rikers Island to do visits was actually inconvenient to families. It was actually a hassle. Getting individuals to court, what we're starting to see right now with the shortage of staff, people aren't even able to make their court dates in the various barrels because they're housed on Rikers Island because of the transportation. And then three, what is a facility should be doing? Should a facility be addressing the core issues or the root cause that actually generated the actual incarceration? So for us, what we see happening now, the vote's there. We see this mayor kicking it down the road, kicking the can down the road, right? And while we're happy to see a new mayor come in, we already see talks that this mayor possibly is going to try to kick it down. And what has happened is become a political issue, right? No one really wants to execute this on their political watch, but the fact of the constituents, the residents of New York deserve better, and the constituents and just the over cost of the facility management that we're actually going through at this time. The cost factor of what it costs to house a person on Rikers Island, one, because of the construction, the lack of security, the accountability. You have so many correctional officers, but again, if you've ever worked at a correctional facility, the lack of updates, the lack of 21st century that this facility holds is just a hazard within itself, not only for the people who are confined there, for the staff as well.
Yeah. And, everybody hears, and we hear of another tragic death, people dying while in custody, and a lot of outrage across New York City. But let's get at it. I mean, really, this is something that should have been handled a long time ago. And we talk about possibly kicking it down, kicking the can down the block a little bit further. But are you optimistic, at least, that with the decarceration efforts that are being put forward, that we can see some substantial change?
I really am optimistic because what this has went from is a criminal justice concern and issue to a human rights and civil rights, right? The
Right.
individuals that are incarcerated there have a right. They were not sentenced to death. They were not arrested to go to death, right? And you had a responsibility once they're in your custody and care to man for them. Now, let's be honest. There's been 14 deaths in New York. I think one was at NDOC, but this isn't breaking news. This is the reason the continuation of why the campaign launched, right? So there were a couple of things. When I look at the news, when I read the reports of the individuals who have died, some of them certainly have died from the acknowledgement that they had COVID. So that's the lack of emergency preparedness and prioritization of the individuals in a vulnerable situation around even access to vaccines, or were they there on a charge that they could have been released back to the community awaiting charge. But then there's another factor that I don't think we're talking about, that a number of these individual deaths have been suicides.
Mhm.
And some of those suicides have been related to individuals who had mental illness, right? So what we know, again, my argument is the lack of automation, the lack of updates that this facility has. There's no connection between the community mental health system and Department of Corrections. So when you get to the Department of Corrections, mental health is self-reported. Most people, especially from Black and Brown community, there's a stigma associated with it. And especially in correctional facilities, because in some facilities, you have a different color uniform that everybody knows you have a mental health diagnosis, or you're put in a special population. So if I get arrested on Rikers and I don't identify my mental health, I'm now arrested, no longer have access to my psychotropic medication. I have given no signs of suicide ideations, and then I'm put in a cell and I commit suicide. That's not something the facility could have acknowledged, right? But if we had systems that actually worked with each other and systems of accountability, and also I question this, every jail has an intake where you sit down with an individual, and sometimes in that one-on-one conversation, some diagnosis or visual diagnosis can occur, right? Does that even happen at Rikers Island with the shortage of staff? Everyone who is taken into that facility should go through a visual assessment of their mental health, their physical health, to even be part of a general population before they're put into those population pods.
Yeah. And I want to take a moment to talk about something that you raised earlier about lack of emergency preparedness. We would think that when you're in the criminal justice system and you're looking at these jails, that the one thing that should be standard is that you have this emergency preparedness system. But what COVID has shown us, what storms have shown us, is New York City, as a whole, is not prepared for emergency preparedness. But when we talk about the jails, even worse.
Yeah. So that was what we discovered at the height of COVID. Everyone was calling for the release of individuals, and we knew that jails and correctional facilities were not able to release. I always call Department of Corrections the babysitter, right? The judge, parent drops the person off, tells you when the person can be picked up or released, and you can't let that child go until that date or that parent returns and tell you to release that child. They have no authoritative, but the mayor does, the governor does, to actually overrule that parents drop-off rule. But what we discovered was that correctional facilities and jails were the only congregate living in this country that was not mandated to have emergency preparedness. And as you said, COVID made it national to everyone, but storms have shown us that there was no plan to preserve the lives of the individuals who are actually in the custody and care of the facility. There, however, is a plan if the facility feels threatened or taken hostage by the individuals. There's a plan of action of how you respond, but there was no plan. So Just Leadership launched the Just Us campaign. And that is to push legislators to adopt emergency management style plans that preserves the lives. You can't create a plan in the middle of an emergency, but what time is showing us, especially with climate change, that emergencies are going to continue to happen, storms are going to continue to happen, and how do we preserve those lives? I think another one to bring is that part of our plan asks for access to whatever the intervention is, such as the vaccine. And what we saw from the mayor's release of the vaccine access, again, Rikers Island individuals were put to the last. So is that the devaluing of the lives in that correctional facility? And his argument is that because they're short of staff. Well, technically, you can have your Department of Health staff go inside the facility and administer vaccines. So that's not an excuse to dehumanize and refuse access to a vaccine to that population.
Yeah. And so talk about the work that you're doing right now. Obviously, you know, very busy on the front lines dealing with the issues of decarceration. When we talk about from a political perspective, government officials, finding government officials to this whole issue of decarceration, given the fact that when you look at most of the low-level offenses, we're finding those are people in communities of color, people who simply cannot just raise bail. And we knew that there's the bail reform, but these issues still exist.
So, and I think we're in this moment of racial reckoning. And as advocates, as an organization that empowers advocates to speak their voice, we're really talking about this from a civil and human rights perspective, right? So the criminal justice system, and what I share with communities is, the criminal justice system is the catch basin to all the other failed systems. And if we can continue to just focus on the criminal justice system to decarcerate, we're not stopping the other systems that funnel into it, right? So it's not an either or, it's an and, and plus these other systems of having access to basic education, having access to affordable housing, having access to living wages through employment and different things of that nature, but also having access, and a lot of times people miss this, having access to substance abuse and mental health. Growing up, just to be honest, Daren, growing up in America as an African-American is traumatizing enough. Then if you add in our violent communities that happen, then you add in incarceration. Those are all traumatic endpoints that nobody addresses from our community. So we send people back out to the community and say, be successful, when nobody ever addressed the traumatic experience the individual has had and learned to suppress that actually comes out in different things, right? So when we talk about this decarceration, I no longer want to talk about it from releasing people. I want to talk about it from a human rights of, should we be incarcerated and punishing people for being poor? Because bail is only acknowledging my return to court. When you put $1 million bail on me because I stole a $20 steak, you already knew I couldn't afford anything, right? So are you criminalizing me for being impoverished and different things of that nature? Really looking at it, but also acknowledging the historical legacy of slavery in the criminal justice system, right? How it was created at the abolishment of slavery, how bail reform is nothing but the bailsman selling my freedom back to my family, just like slave owners sold you on the Capitol steps. GPS monitoring is nothing but the electronic version of shackling. Probation and parole is nothing but community-based prisons, because even your family is now under surveillance and their house can be disrupted, disrespected, just like the correctional officers do in your cell, right? So looking at the and then we add on top of it, now that you have this conviction, you can't live here, you can't work here, you can't have access to this, you can't attend your child. So it's still those Jim Crow laws of where you couldn't live and work and what you couldn't do that are actually perpetrating through the criminal justice. And I think what we see nationally is, even when we fight for our voting rights, there are people who don't want us to have that power. So It's almost still a dehumanization of a sub-segment of society. We are people. We made a mistake. And if you say your Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation is supposed to do that and you believe in it, why are you still holding me accountable when I come back to the community? So when we talk from that, there's something that is triggered in the DNA of those in power of suppressing and oppressing a certain margin of population. But when we talk about it from a human rights and a civil rights perspective, it actually forces them to look at their racism face to face of why they feel this certain group of people don't have a right to what they're allocating or advocating for everybody else.
And before we go, there's so much we can talk about. I mean, we got to bring it back and we can continue this conversation, but I want to get an opportunity to get people connected to you. How can they get connected to the work, and how can they support what you're advocating for?
Definitely go to our website at www.JLUSA.org. Sign up for our newsletters, get engaged in some of the work. We can connect you with the advocates. What I like to tell people, the work in New York, our goal was to empower, educate, and elevate the voices of those directly impacted. And what you're seeing now is those individuals who have been impacted on autopilot. They are not going to let go. So it brings us joy to know that exactly what we set out with this young organization to do is actually being demonstrated right there in New York. But definitely visit our website. We could connect you. We're a national organization. We have advocates, leaders across the country that are working on some really good ideas that actually bring human rights and civil rights back to individuals who have been marginalized the most.
DeAnna Hoskins, thank you so much for being with us. I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today, sharing a lot about Just Leadership USA, and most of all, decarceration. Got to bring it back.
Yes, thank you, Daren. Got to. Thank you, guys. Thank you, viewers.
All righty. Well, listen, taking a quick break. We do have more show. I don't want you to go anywhere. We're going to continue talking, and later on we'll be talking to the George Floyd organization. Really, we are George Floyd. You'll find out more about that and more here on the Social Justice Forums.
We built a media network for you.
BronxNet TV.
Come learn in your new state-of-the-art studios at Lehman College.
At Mercy College.
And coming soon to the South Bronx in the Hub.
Inspire with your stories, culture, history.
Your Bronx on BronxNet.
Engage with us.
Connect with us at your channels and at BronxNet.tv.
Learn, engage, inspire. BronxNet TV.
From the Bronx
to the world.
BronxNet.
We know that people are dealing with the health crisis, but there's also a lot of food insecurity.
We're giving out healthy food options, and that's what's key here.
If you're a senior, you have a disability, they'll actually deliver meals to you.
The residents are anxious, they're worried, they're scared, they want to be tested.
When things were happening in our community, and we couldn't get the help.
There's almost a presumption of criminality that attaches to your skin color.
The site will prioritize those who are at highest risk in the population.
If you feel symptoms and you'd like to visit one of these COVID-19 testing sites here in the Bronx, you may call the State Health Department's hotline.
Important to note about this site is no reservations are needed. This is a walk-in clinic.
A lot of us are out of work and looking for something to do.
We have the machinery and the skills to make large scales of these masks and gowns.
Take care of your people. It's going to go way further than we actually can understand.
Right now, employees like myself are just adjusting
to the new reality.
Reporting from BronxNet, this is Daren.
If you're struggling to afford your internet bills during the pandemic, there's a temporary government program that may be able to help. It's called the Emergency Broadband Benefit, and it provides up to $50 monthly discount on your broadband bill to qualifying households. Find more information about the program, including if you qualify and how to enroll at fcc.gov/broadbandbenefit, or call toll-free at 833-511-0311. That's 833-511-0311.
And welcome back. As America's premier Muslim civil rights group, the Council on American-Islamic Relations has worked for more than 25 years to defend the Constitution. Now, their mission is to enhance understanding of Islam, protecting civil rights, promoting justice, and empowering American Muslims. CARE New York serves as I should say CARE New York serves Muslim New Yorkers through legal advocacy, education, media relations, civic engagement, as well as grassroots mobilization. And joining us now to share a little bit more is the legal director of Council on American-Islamic Relations of the New York chapter, Ahmed and Mohamed. And Ahmed, good to have you here on the Social Justice Forum.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very glad to be here.
And excuse me, I want to talk a little bit in depth when we talk about really where we are with Muslim Americans, because as we look, particularly here in New York City, we're seeing a rise in hate crimes, but just give us a sense of the temperature that you're sensing right now, particularly in New York City when it comes to Muslim Americans.
Yeah, so there has been a rise in hate crimes, a rise in bias incidents targeting not just the Muslim community, but other communities, including specifically the Asian American community. A lot of it stemmed through, COVID and the actions and words of, President Trump that really riled up, bigots around the country and really made vulnerable communities targets. And that has made our work here at CARE New York extremely difficult to combat. So we, you gave the introduction about our mission and the work that we do and how we do it. And it really breaks down to three types of, work that we like to kind of describe it as, DEA, right? We defend, we empower, and then we advocate for our community. And a lot of times, especially when it comes to hate crimes, we're doing all three all in once. They're not generally mutually exclusive of each other. So we're defending our community members when it comes to attacks, bias, discrimination. We were empowering our community by giving them resources and the information on how they themselves can take steps to protect themselves and to stand up for themselves and know what their rights are in particular situations. And then we advocate for our community. In hate crimes, it's making sure that law enforcement are treating hate crimes targeting the Muslim community seriously. They're labeling them as such, because what we see is not only are we seeing underreporting from our community, but when there are reports, we're seeing law enforcement officials really not taking those crimes as seriously as they do other protected groups, or they're mislabeling, right? Because the city does have an incentive, whether we like to admit it or not, to have as little, just like they do when it comes to crime. They want to report as little amount of crime as possible. And a city that has a high number of hate crimes tends to get less tourism and is seen as less safe. And so there is that incentive for the city to not label these as hate crimes in some instances. And so we want to make sure that our community is being treated fairly, and the crimes that are impacting our community are being investigated seriously.
Yeah, when we talk about investigation, obviously we know that a lot of advocacy has gone on for investigations into a lot of these crimes. How hard is it for you to really get both law enforcement, government officials to be responsive to some of these acts that are sometimes blatant and sometimes not so blatant? Because we know that in order to prove a hate crime, sometimes that threshold can be kind of high.
Yeah, the threshold is high, but we have to recognize that, when there are indicators, law enforcement needs to investigate. Law enforcement needs to do their job, which is not to prosecute a crime. That's the district attorney's office, right? And that's not done until all the evidence and the investigation itself has run its course, right? If there is an indication of a hate crime or a situation is very strange that is indicative of a hate crime, especially when we're in an environment of a high hate crime period, law enforcement needs to take those steps to investigate it, because we're not going to know if it's a hate crime ultimately unless an investigation is conducted. We have had difficulty, getting those hate crimes started to begin with, right? I mean, there is a classic case that was reported on in Bronx, of a young woman who was attacked on a MTA bus. She was told there was no evidence. Case was closed without any real investigation. She went out and investigated her own crime, and it turned out it was a hate crime. She found video footage. Our office eventually got involved and helped advocate for her and her family, and forced the NYPD to reopen those investigations. Now, sometimes when you have an investigation, especially in a hate crime, not only is it a crime targeting the individual, but it really impacts the whole community. Right. And what happens in those situations is it's a traumatizing event for that individual. And when the individual has to relive that event over and over again through advocacy, right? Because sometimes advocacy means living your story in public. They're retelling those stories. It becomes extremely difficult for that individual to continue that fight long term, especially when you have law enforcement that's, not really putting in, the effort that we think sometimes they should, right? Sometimes they put in that effort while the media is watching, and then the effort lags off afterwards, and all of a sudden a year goes by and the case is no longer there, right? And it's hard for that victim to continue re-upping that life lived experience.
So what do we do as a community when we talk about combating Islamophobia? It's huge. We know that it's out there. What can we do as regular residents, everyday people, in dealing with combating Islamophobia?
Yeah. Look, I think the number one way to combat Islamophobia is to meet your Muslim neighbors. There have been study after study from the Pew Research Center, from others, that show that individuals who say they know a Muslim tend to like Muslims a lot, right? And individuals who say they've never met a Muslim, now they think they've never met a Muslim, that's what they think. They tend to not think very, nice things about Muslims, right? And that leads to hatred of the unknown, right? Ignorance, is very dangerous sometimes. And I think if you meet Muslims, you'll know that a lot of times they're your doctors, they're your nurses. There's, I think, 10% of the New York City public school teachers are Muslim, right? They're teachers, they're taxi drivers, Uber drivers, folks getting you, your food. They're essential workers. A large number of essential workers are Muslim. And if you know that, you will have a positive, relationship with Muslims, right? Because an individual. We tend to, have a very difficult time hating people that we actually know, right? And then, of course, it's education, right? What is Islam? What has happened is there is a huge Islamophobia network that's a multi-million-dollar industry designed to create disinformation and hatred of Muslims. And so we have to combat that with real Islam, which means is letting people know what Islam is, right? Not going out and necessarily converting people to Islam, but educating them, right? Just like how I know a lot about, the Bible and Christianity and Judaism, right? I happen to grow up, around those communities, so I know a lot. So if I see, disinformation about, Christianity, I will know it and will not accept it as truth. And so that's, I think, really important. And, Muslims are more and more involved in politics and civics, right? And civil life. And I think that's important because once we start seeing Muslims in Congress, Muslims in City Hall, Muslims in Albany, there's going to be a reflection of our values, and, Muslims in daily life will become, more normalized.
Right. And when it comes to policing, we know that there is that question that has been raised of communities of color about discriminatory policing when it comes to African Americans, those in communities of color. And we have to also add the Muslim community into that. Talk to us about what you're seeing and what your goal is.
Yeah, so very important, nuance that a lot of people may not know, because a lot of times what the media has done is they have plastered Muslims with Arabs, right? Like Muslims are Arab, right? Or Arab, right? That's just not true. Not in this country, at least, right? So in this country, there is really no majority ethnic group that's Muslim. And so African Americans in this country, for a larger part, obviously African Americans brought here, as enslaved individuals. I think roughly 20% of the enslaved individuals were Muslim, right? So we've been here since the founding of this nation, and we, Muslims have built this country as well. And for the larger part, up until recently, African Americans made up the larger part of Muslims in this country, right? Think about, Malcolm X and the number of Muslims, especially here in Harlem, in New York City, he, brought into the Muslim faith. And so that's really important because right now, the African American Muslim population is roughly 20%, according to studies, of the Muslim population in this country. And so why is that so important? Because when we talk about policing, right, you're African American, you're already feeling every bit of the abuse and the systemic racism that comes from our policing system by being Black, right? And then you add on to that you're also Muslim, right? And so you're doubly affected. And of course, if you're a woman, you add to that as well. If you're a woman that wears hijab, you keep adding and adding and adding, and it's a lot of, a huge burden that you're feeling. So what we have seen is, law enforcement's directed at Muslims has largely seen Muslims as a national security threat, right? And that we are always tied when it comes to policing as, something to deal with terrorism, right? Our community members of all backgrounds, as long as they're Muslim, are going to get visits in a lot of cases from the FBI or from the NYPD. And a lot of times, even if it's simple outreach to our mosques, right, it's the Joint Terrorism Task Force, right? Imagine that the FBI is doing outreach to a synagogue or to a Catholic church or a Baptist church, right? They're going to send an outreach team normally. But when it comes to Muslims, they're sending an outreach team from the Joint Terrorism Task Force, right? And in essence, it's a way to surveil that community and to try to convince that that mosque leader, the imam, to become, an inside individual for the FBI. We saw huge surveillance from the NYPD during Bloomberg and Giuliani's administration towards the tail end that mapped Muslims all over New York City, including going more than 100 miles away from the city, right? Can you imagine we were using our taxpayer dollars to send NYPD officers, undercover informants, undercover agents to camping trips that students in college were taking out in, like the wilderness in Philadelphia, right? And that continues. Now surveillance has taken on a new age, which is a technology-based surveillance, right? You have facial recognition, you have, cameras everywhere. You have profiling of, Black activists who are in the BLM movement. You have profiling of Muslims. You have profiling of individuals fighting for Palestinian freedom, and surveillance in all of these situations, and that leads to a huge like traumatic feeling and relationship that we have. There's a lot of distrust in law enforcement between the Muslim community and law enforcement. And it's really up to law enforcement to own up to their mistakes. They have to hold themselves accountable. If they don't, we'll do it, right? That's what we're here for as we advocate and organize our community to make sure that we're holding law enforcement accountable, that we're reducing, the law enforcement budget and really rediverting that to resources around the city where it's needed. We don't believe in, trying to lock up everybody, right? That doesn't make sense, right? We have to be proactive in the steps that we're taking.
And when we talk about being proactive, honestly, awareness and outreach are just some of those things that are being done in a proactive way. Are you finding now that as the message gets out, are you finding as information is becoming more and more disseminated when it comes to Islam, when it comes to Muslims, that the message is being better received now than ever before? Or do you find it to be even more challenging now?
I think it's both. I think
I was going to say the same thing, right? I forgot to throw that in there. Or both, right? Right.
Yeah. So absolutely. Look, I think that there's, look, we're continually making that push, right? Of educating not just our community, but educating others. And we're seeing improvements. We're seeing more Muslims run for office in this country than ever before, right? By huge numbers. In January, we'll probably have the first Muslim city council member. No, I'm sorry, not the first. It'll be the second, right? Because Mr. Miller is also a council member right now. There'll be the first Muslim woman, I should say, on city council, right? We have 3 individuals who are state elected officials, right? And so that's really important because that gives us as a community, voices in places that hold a lot of power, right? And, we hope that those individuals also reflect the values that we have, not just as an organization, but as a community, right? And, standing up for justice and making sure that, not just our community is protected, but all communities are protected because, we believe that, our freedoms are tied in with other marginalized communities, right? We don't, subscribe to the theory of a model minority, right? We think that a lot of these policies, a lot of these systemic issues that are impacting us are also impacting our brothers and sisters in the other marginalized communities, like the Asian American community, like the Black community, like the African community, and so forth and so on. It's challenging because the other side, right, the Islamophobia network is very well funded, right? And that, this interview here probably will get spun as being some sort of, radical type of thing that I've said, right? Who knows, cutting a line that maybe I've said and reinterpreting it out of context, right?
Right.
That's what we see a lot in the Islamophobia network, is to demonize our individuals who may be leaders within their communities in the Muslim community. And it's a difficult challenge to work with. And what we are seeing is our world is becoming more polarized, right? There are a lot more extremes when we're talking about in politics now than ever before. And that's really, really difficult. What we also know is that we can't sit on the sidelines, right? And we hope no one is sitting on the sidelines. You have to choose. You're either on the side of, equality, equity, and justice, or you're on the other side. And I think if you're sitting in the middle, you're really helping the side that's doing this country and our communities a great disservice.
I mean, we're going to have to leave it there, but certainly a lot to talk about. Want to have you back, certainly, as we can continue to break down some things. But a great conversation, at least great enlightenment. And so for our viewers, there's nothing edited here. You get the full straight narrative, and you can get a chance to see the whole interview in its entirety, nothing edited here. And hopefully that you'll be able to find out more about the Muslim community and to really be able to combat Islamophobia, which is very prevalent in our society. Ahmed, thank you so much for being with us here on the Social Justice Forums.
Thank you so much for having me.
Hey, listen, thank you. And listen, going to take a quick break. We got more here on the Social Justice Forums. We'll continue our conversation, elevating the conversation as we continue right after this. back to the show. Confront Art is connecting artists to social justice causes to create public art displays. Now, they recently announced its inaugural exhibition, See Injustice, which debuted open to the public on October the 1st in Union Square. The See Injustice series aims to honor the lives and ongoing messages through art, tying together three iconic people. And joining us now to discuss more is the spokesperson, I should say, of We Are Floyd, and that is LaCrown Johnson. And then we've also got artist Chris Carnabuci. And thank you both for joining us.
No problem. Thank you for having us. Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Thank you. LaCrown, I'll start with you. Really, this initiative is doing something in promoting seeing injustice, but then also raising an awareness. Talk to us a little bit about your work.
Well, as far as with We Are Floyd is a 501c3, and it was created by the brother of George Floyd, Terrence Floyd, on the foundation of family, as well as culture, understanding, truth, love, and unity. With those factors being said, partnering with the See Injustice Project, we're able to really put and promote that actual social change that happens every day unfairly to a lot of different communities, not just the African American community. So our goal with We Are Floyd is to really help those communities that are dealing with those social injustices and giving them the tools that they need to get those changes done.
Yeah. And so, Chris, you have designed 3 sculptures of 3 iconic people, and talk to us about the sculptures that you designed and your work.
Sure. So as you mentioned, it's George Floyd, John Lewis, and Breonna Taylor. This all started back last summer, of course, when George Floyd was killed and the world sort of stood still. And I remember sitting with my wife, and she turned to me and she said, "You need to do a sculpture." And I said, yeah, it was, not for any particular reason, but to sort of capture this very historic and significant moment. So I was able to reach out to another artist, Daniel Edwards, and he and his son Rodman had already done a 3D model. So that's my first step, is taking the 3D model and essentially deconstructing it. And to that extent, I could make it as large as I want. So just to fast forward, we eventually met up with Terrence Floyd. He saw the sculpture of George Floyd, was very moved by it. And he thought that since he was setting up We Are Floyd, that having the art in conjunction with this foundation would be a good method to sort of bring awareness to it. And that's how it all began.
Yeah. And talk to us, because we had, as I talked a little bit about the inaugural exhibition, which debuted on October the 1st, LaCrown, obviously an opportunity for people to see. What were you hoping was going to be the takeaway?
Well, we wanted people to see, and I know this in working day to day with We Are Floyd, along with Confront Art, that these 3 statues, they're a form of representation of all the social injustices that happened prior to the actual people's lives of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, who were featured prior to their lives, but also to protect those lives in the future and stop stuff like this from happening. These statues, along with John Lewis being a person who stood in the gap and stood in the fight as a congressman, these statues are to help promote that social change through art. You can use art as leverage. You can use art to get the justice that's needed by putting it in front of you, simply as Confront Art says, confronting it. So that's definitely something that we were hoping for, and it's happening.
It is happening, but also I got to talk about what also happened as well. And that's the vandalization of the George Floyd statue. A lot of people enraged by the fact, when we talk about injustice already, his death, a huge injustice and a murder, first of all, but then now to watch and to see the vandalized statue. Just give me your thoughts and your takeaway, both of you, as you're out here doing this work, but yet and still you understand that the forces of evil are still present.
Well, I don't think any one of us was really shocked at this vandalization. Maybe we were surprised that it happened so soon after the opening, But listen, there's a diversity of opinion on George Floyd. And I just thought, there's a better way of expressing one's opinion than to vandalize an object. And essentially what it did was amplify our message that, we got a long way to go. Art is it's sort of a tool for introspection, right? So we can look within ourselves and find meaning to what we're looking at. But it's also, and especially with this exhibit, it's an opportunity to gather and share each other's opinions and have discussions and civil discourse. And I think that as an artist, that's my job, is to put forth a venue, an environment for this type of discourse. And I think it's working out.
Mm-hmm. I would have to say, getting that call that morning that had happened, it was disheartening. Like you said, Chris, it wasn't something that we were surprised at, but it was unfortunate that it did have to happen. And it took an individual to have so much, I'll have to use the word hate in their heart to do something like that, specifically to the George Floyd statue. In speaking with Terrence, he wasn't surprised. He was more so, he just wanted to understand what that perspective of that individual had in their mind. Why did they hate his brother so much that they felt the need to signal him out? What was their reasoning for doing something like this? It happened in Flatbush, as mentioned before with Chris. It happened in Flatbush, so we weren't confused, or we were prepared to have to do something with it. But as soon as we arrived on site, it was the community who stepped in, the community of New York. And I'm talking about not just immediate Union Square. I'm talking about people came from different boroughs to help clean up the statue, to help fix what the person who thought they did something would take the statue away. They tried to break it down, but what it did was it only strengthened our movement. It really strengthened it. People started creating even more of a memorial around the statue. Like, people held rallies, people held their own personal events, we had a union of religion, a union of different cultures, a union of different orientations. So it only strengthened that unity. And it really did go to show that these statues are going to help promote that healing that we want to promote, not just here in New York, but hopefully around the world. Last year, so
yeah, no, I was just gonna jump in and say there's an old saying in the book that I read: what is meant for evil, God works out for good. So, it has a greater impact simply by the fact of, you thought you were doing something negative, but here it is. You've really now regalvanized a community, and not just a community, you've regalvanized across parts of the world, because this wasn't something that was just local. Everybody heard about this cross country.
Yes, it did. Cross country, and actually globally.
Yeah, I actually did it. I'm sorry. I was on the Times of London radio show right after this occurred. So it is global. And sorry to interrupt, LaCrown. I just wanted to add, just to sort of emphasize the fact that it did amplify the message. And, I was wondering, when this person did this, whether he felt instant regret as he skateboarded away with paint on his fingertips, or whether he was proud of what he did. And he certainly couldn't tell anybody about it. It's not the type of thing you post on Facebook. But I'm wondering about him. I'm wondering what was, as you said, what was in his heart, because it appears that there was hatred, and I'd like to have a conversation with him about it, really.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the biggest thing that, and you touched on this. I think talk about having conversation, right? Because those are the icebreakers. Those are the ways that we can really create partnerships. Those are the ways that we can respect people's differences. It really starts with having conversation and being able to talk to people and hash out, what is it that you really feel? This is what you think. This is what you believe. And so I'm leaning, and I'm trying to transition to We Are Floyd, because I know that's part of what the work is. It's about really, addressing, but it's also creating dialogue and what we do right here. Like, we're engaging through dialogue and conversation. So, LaCrown, just share with us a little bit more about We Are Floyd, and I don't want you to not forget about the partnership with Confront Art too.
Right. So We Are Floyd, our objectives are first to understand culture, because when you understand culture, which is really what people's differences are, then it can help to promote change, which will eventually lead to justice. And with those principles, we believe that we can help a lot of different communities. Our goal is to work with different companies like Confront Art, other organizations that are already established, like Eric Gardner Foundation, and we work with a few more, and we're still building and growing collectively to help promote, to get these and promote change. So it's a step-by-step process. We are literally 9 months in to having this foundation, and through the partnership with Confront Art, with the Sea and Justice Project, we are able to now provide more of a platform for those voices that need to be heard. And our goal is to literally go into other places that need that healing, that need those changes, that need those conversations. And we figured out one of the biggest things, it starts with the youth. The youth. We actually created a school trip to the Sea and Justice Art Exhibition with Terrence's elementary school, PS 213. And the students, they were in 2nd and 4th grade. When I tell you, these kids, and I'm gonna have to use the term woke, these kids are woke. They're aware of what's going on. They're aware of the social injustices that they have to face daily. And these statues, they're allowing for those conversations to happen, not only to the teachers, to the students, but to the parents, to the students. Terrence, he teaches his children, and I see him every day with his kids. They're the foundation of this organization. His family is the foundation of this organization. He teaches them these principles, and he teaches them to understand and respect individuality. When you do that, you can create change. It may not happen in large steps, but small steps. And these statues have created a bigger step than where we were just a few months ago.
Yeah. And Chris, for one, as being the one that's, responsible for putting the statue together, you have an opportunity for people to actually see your work. But could you just share with us from your perspective, what the power of a statue is, and more particularly, these statues?
Well, as I said, I mean, as a sculptor, my only job is to produce work that creates an environment for others to react to it. It's not about me imposing my thoughts on anyone, but it's to create that environment, as I mentioned before, for civil discourse. But even though these are sculptures that I did, and of course I had the help of the Edwards initially, this is all about, it was always been only about helping out Terrence and We Are Floyd, and at a higher level, the sort of raising awareness of injustice. But that was my intention, is to do what I can, to do my small part to aid, the different foundations with which we're affiliated. And I think LaCrown said it, perfectly when she just discussed what's going on with the foundations and what their intentions are, what their goals are. And I'm just happy to help.
Yeah. LaCrown, how can people partner? Thank you, Chris. Yes, I do want to say that too. How can people partner to really be a part of the work that's going on with We Are Floyd? I mean, obviously, there's so many people who have an attachment to George Floyd, and not just Floyd, but George Floyd, but his family and the work that goes on, and what George Floyd represented and continues to represent. How can people play a part in supporting?
Well, definitely be on the lookout on our social media page, wearefloyd.org, as social media runs the world nowadays. However, of course, our website, www.wearefloyd.org. Feel free to contact us. It will be an immediate response, and we can take it from there. We're welcome and open to all different types of ideas. the best part is working with Confront Art is that we are able to utilize art as a form or a platform to get these type of changes in the works. But we're open up to other artists and other ideas. Talk to us, come to us. Let's collectively make something happen.
Right. And Chris, how do people get connected to your work and find out more about you?
I'm fine-tuning my chriscarnabuci.com website. And that's, I obviously have Instagram, Chris Carnabuci, where I do some posting. Not a lot, but I do some. This is actually the third.
I like the way how you did it, some, right.
I let other people do posting for me. But this is actually my third public exhibit. So I have pics from the other two. But this is, of course, to me, the most important. And I'm proud to be working hand in hand with the We Are Floyd Foundation, once again, doing what I can.
Yeah. Well, LaCrown and Chris, I'm definitely honored to have you guys here on the show. And I want to thank you for the work that you're doing and really continue to create public awareness. And as I tell people all the time that, that George Floyd extends so much far beyond a criminal court case. It's really everyday life and the work that people must do to impact social change and world change is an everyday thing. So I applaud you for the part that you guys are playing and what you're doing. And most of all, for taking the time to hang out with me for a little while and just share on the show. So thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. I would like to announce one other thing.
Absolutely.
Super excited. So in honor of George Floyd's birthday, his 48th birthday that just passed on October 14th, we want to announce, We Are Floyd, announce the George Floyd NFT collection on Maker's Place. And what's amazing about this is that this is an opportunity for people's eyes to just be wide open to the social injustice, but also to help promote money for a charity. So super excited. This is going to be a platform for people to become more socially aware, more involved, and more hands-on through an NFT collection on Maker's Place.
Well, that's outstanding and amazing news. I want to thank you for breaking the news for us and letting us know. We will continue to follow all the great work that you guys are doing at We Are Floyd, and certainly anything that we can do here at the Social Justice Forums, by which this show was actually created after the death of George Floyd. We're glad that we could be a part. So thank you so much for being with us both. And I want to let our viewers know, yes, we've come to the end of our show today. And we do hope that you joined or liked this week's discussion, enjoyed it from the place of it giving you some information. It also promotes the civic dialogue, but then some more awareness, because we do need to be woke and aware. LaCrown talked about that just a few minutes ago. Want to let you know also, you can also catch the recablecast right here on BronxNet channel 67, also channel 2133 on Verizon Fios. And we invite you, listen, stay connected to us. Next week, we're going to elevate the conversation, continue to bring you more right here on the Social Justice Forums. I'm Daren Jaime saying take care and God bless.